When building a fence, should you build that fence using a nail or a screw? It's a subject matter that's been argued about since probably the beginning of time. Since man first built his first fence, his neighbor got in an argument over whether that thing was built versus nails versus screws. I've got to believe it. So to learn which one of these fasteners we use as a business and which one I recommend, let's dig into it. Before we get started, let's define a few things. When I'm talking about a nail, I'm talking about a ring shank nail. I'm not going to talk about the coating. There's stainless, aluminum, there's a galvanized coated version available as well. I'm only talking about the nail itself with a ring shank. There's other options available in nails. You've got a stainless steel, there's aluminum, there's galvanized steel, there's a lot of coating options and material options. There's also a lot of bore options, meaning this is a ring shank bore. You can also have a screw bore, so think rifling going down the shank of the nail. You can have a smooth bore nail, just where this nail is absolutely smooth. For the purpose of today's video, we're talking about a ring shank nail of any one of a number of materials. When we're talking about the screws, we're talking about a standard screw. This is a coated screw that we use. It's got a Torx head on it. We're just talking about a normal wood screw. Much like nails, there's different options available with these screws, material options, coating options, etc. For the purpose of this, we're just talking about a screw in general, regardless of the coating or base material. First things first, and really kind of where this argument all boils down to is cost. First off, the material cost, where a ring shank nail similar to this would be roughly 1 to 1.5 cents per nail. A coated screw would run about 7 cents, 6 to 7 cents per screw. Of course, that's going to vary depending on length, diameter of the screw, etc. But roughly speaking, a penny to penny and a half compared to a 6.5 to 7 cent screw. We're already off to a more economical choice with a ring shank and a more expensive choice with a screw. We can also talk about costs when it comes to labor. When it comes to these nails, we install them as part of a coil. They come in just a round coil that's fed into a nail gun, a pneumatic driven nail gun. We can install these nails with precision incredibly quickly. Now with the screws, and I understand there are screw guns in the market that have belt-fed screws. I don't have experience using those. If you do, I'd love to hear from you as far as production rate when it goes to screws. But even with those self-fed screw guns, I'd have to think the production rate is incredibly lower than with a nail. So all in, materials and labor, when considering production rates, nails by far outweigh screws in terms of cost. You're going to have a much more economical fence with a nail. But Joe, nails pull out all the time. My neighbor has a fence where the boards are pulling away from the fence. I hear you. We replace these fences all the time. I've seen them for the last 25 years. Typically, when you see these nails getting pulled out, it's a smooth bore nail. They're not really applicable to this conversation where we're talking about ring shank nails. There's fences that I installed with my dad 25 years ago with ring shank nails, specifically at his house, that's still standing. The boards are still attached as firmly today as they were 25 years ago using ring shank nails. Again, the benefit of a ring shank nail is it has these ridges down the bore. So as that nail tries to get pulled out of the wood, out of the post or the 2x4, these ridges are grabbing all of that fiber around them and securing this nail in the wood. With a smooth bore, really all you're relying on is friction, and it can lead to those pickets or rails separating themselves from the rails or the post. When we're talking about ring shank nails, they're incredibly good at holding that fence together. Now, so are screws. Screws perform incredibly well. When we see failure in screws, it's typically right at the head, where the head meets the shaft of the screw is typically where you see the failure. So maybe they're installed with too much torque, there's too much pressure installed in the screw, they're embedded too far into the material. It could be a number of reasons. It could be a weak source material of the screw. By and large, they perform well. I'm not here to say that screws don't work. They do. I'm saying that they don't work 7 times as well as a ring shank nail. They often perform relatively the same when it comes to holding pickets and rails on the rails or the post. Again, when they cost 7 times as much as a nail, you really want to see some sort of performance that can offset that cost. Now, the one benefit of using a screw to attach this fence is the screw can be easily removed. So if we're talking about removable panels, for whatever reason, maybe there's an easement access issue, or you just want an easier way to get into the yard without the cost of a gate, screws can be a good option. Again, also with repairs. If you need to remove a section to repair it or remove a few pickets. Screws do have the added benefit of being able to be backed out and then reinstalled fairly easily. It's been my experience with ring shank nails, they don't necessarily come out. When you're trying to replace a picket installed with ring shank nails, you typically end up splitting that picket, or at the very least, pulling that picket away from the nail with the nail still embedded in either the post or the rail, whatever it's embedded into. They're not as easy to remove and reinstall as a screw is. So if you have a portion of fence where you think that could be an issue, either there's a higher risk than normal of needing repaired, or it's a removable section, there we can justify the added expense of a screw over a nail. Now, as I've said already, we use both. So when do we use one over the other? Well, typically when installing the rails specifically into a steel Postmaster post, we would use a screw. It's the best fastener for that particular job. It can be installed, it can be removed and replaced if repair is necessary. But when we're installing the pickets on those rails, it's a ring shank nail. One, from a production standpoint, we can install several hundred feet of fence a day using a ring shank nail versus realistically less than half of that with a screw. I would guess probably a third of that with the screw. So with the screw being 7 times the cost and being slower to install, it doesn't make sense for us to install these pickets using a screw. So again, we lean on the ring shank nail. So when you walk up and say, hey Joe, I'm building a fence, what fastener should I use? A screw or a nail? I'm going to say both. And I'm going to ask you what the end result is and guide you either towards a screw or a nail, or in the way we install it, both at the same time for different parts of the fence. And before we wrap up, I just want to say I absolutely recognize there is no real world testing in this video between nails and screws. That's because SWI Fence just did a great job documenting in the field testing between smoothbore and ring shank nails. They included staples and screws into it. We're gonna link to that video in the description below. Be sure to swing by and check out their channel, specifically the video where they test out in real world conditions the differences between nails and screws. For now, I'm Joe Everest, the fence expert, reminding you that good fences make good neighbors, and I'll see you next time.